The room froze as my sister's cruel toast sliced through the wedding cheers. Her wine glass raised, her words dripping with scorn for my truck driver groom. Then his mother stood, her voice a quiet thunder. "It's time you all knew the truth." What secret could turn laughter to gasps in a single breath? Hit that subscribe button and join us on this wild ride. Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. The church bells rang out across Philadelphia, their echoes mingling with the crisp December air. Inside the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, chandeliers cast a warm glow over the wedding guests, some smiling, others whispering behind their hands. Emily Harper stood in her ivory gown, its lace edges brushing the floor, her hand clasped tightly in Daniel Carter's. He looked handsome in his simple black suit, his dark hair slightly tousled, his green eyes steady despite the tension simmering around them. For a moment, it felt like nothing could touch their happiness. Then Sophia stood up. Emily's younger sister, always the sharper-edged one, raised her wine glass with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The room quieted, expectant. "I just want to say," she began, her voice syrupy yet cutting, "how interesting it is that my sister, with her love for art and history, ended up with a truck driver. I mean, compared to my husband, a lawyer. It's quite the contrast. Isn't it?" A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, soft but stinging. Emily's cheeks burned. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend the man she loved, but the words caught in her throat. Beside her, Daniel stayed calm, his thumb brushing over her knuckles as if to say, "I've got this." But before either of them could respond, a small figure rose from the table near the front. Ruth Carter, Daniel's mother, stepped forward. Her silver hair was swept into a neat bun, her emerald dress catching the light. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone silenced the room. "I think," Ruth said, her tone gentle but firm as steel, "it's time everyone here knew the truth about my son." The air shifted. Whispers died mid-sentence. Emily's mother, Margaret, frowned, her perfectly manicured nails tapping her glass. Her father, George, paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. Sophia lowered her wine, her smirk faltering. Emily turned to Daniel, her heart pounding against her ribs. "What's she talking about?" she whispered, but he only squeezed her hand, his gaze locked on his mother. "The truth." What truth? 2 months earlier, Emily hadn't known that question would come to define her life. It was a rainy afternoon in October, the kind where the sky seemed to press down on Philadelphia's old brick streets. She stood by her beat-up sedan outside the Pennsylvania History Museum, where she worked cataloging artifacts and dreaming of the past. The engine had sputtered and died, leaving her stranded as water soaked through her coat. She'd been close to tears when a truck pulled up beside her, its headlights cutting through the downpour. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice warm despite the chill. She nodded, too frustrated to argue, and watched as he popped the hood with a confidence she hadn't expected. His name was Daniel Carter, he told her as he worked, rain dripping off his nose. He drove trucks for a living, crisscrossing the country, seeing places she'd only read about in books. They talked about the winding roads he loved, about the Revolutionary War letters she'd spent hours deciphering at the museum. By the time the rain stopped and her car hummed back to life, he'd scribbled his number on a crumpled receipt. "Call me if it acts up again," he said, flashing a grin that made her stomach flip. "Or, just call me." She'd smiled back, tucking the paper into her pocket, never imagining it would lead her here. To a wedding where her family's laughter stung like needles, and to a moment where Ruth Carter's words hung in the air like a promise, or maybe a warning. Emily glanced around the ballroom, at the faces now watching in stunned silence, and wondered what secret could possibly change everything she thought she knew. Daniel leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear. "Tomorrow," he murmured, so quiet she almost missed it, "I'll show you." But tonight, as Ruth sat back down and the chatter slowly resumed, Emily felt the weight of something unspoken settle over her. She looked at her husband, her truck driver, her steady rock, and realized that whatever came next, it was already too late to turn back. The rain had stopped by the time Emily left that first meeting with Daniel, but the memory of it lingered. His easy laugh, the way his hands moved with quiet skill under the hood of her car. Over the weeks that followed, those moments grew into something more. They'd sit on her tiny apartment balcony, sipping coffee as he told her stories of the road, about the sunrise over the Smoky Mountains, the way truck stops felt like little worlds of their own. She'd share her own tales of dusty museum archives and the lives she pieced together from faded ink. With every conversation she fell deeper, drawn to his kindness, his patience, the way he saw beauty in things she'd never thought to notice. But not everyone saw him the way she did. The Harper family had built their name on real estate, turning a small inheritance into a thriving business that bought and sold Philadelphia's history, one property at a time. Margaret, with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue, had always dreamed big for her daughters. George, softer but no less ambitious, backed her up. Sophia, the youngest, had married James, a lawyer with a corner office and a slick smile, and wore her success like a crown. Emily, though, had chosen a different path. She loved her job at the museum, the quiet satisfaction of preserving the past, even if it didn't come with a fat paycheck or a fancy title. When she brought Daniel home, it was like tossing a match into dry grass. They'd been dating for 6 months, long enough for her to know he was the one. It was a Sunday dinner at her parents' sprawling house in Chestnut Hill, the kind where the table groaned under roast lamb and crystal gleamed in the candlelight. Daniel wore a clean flannel shirt, his boots scrubbed free of road dust, but he still stood out against the polished hardwood and Margaret's pearls. "So, Daniel," Margaret said, slicing into her meat with precision, "you drive trucks? That's interesting. What's the plan, long-term?" Emily tensed, but Daniel just smiled. "I like it," he said simply. "It's honest work, keeps me grounded." Sophia snorted, barely hiding it behind her napkin. "Grounded? That's one way to put it. James just made partner at his firm. Grounded isn't exactly the goal." George cleared his throat, shooting Sophia a look, but the damage was done. Emily's fork clattered against her plate. "He's good at what he does," she said, her voice tight. "And he makes me happy. Isn't that enough?" Margaret set her knife down, her gaze cold. "Happy is fine, Emily, but you deserve stability. A truck driver. What happens when the bills pile up, when you want a family? I won't watch you struggle because of some romantic whim." The room went quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. Daniel reached for Emily's hand under the table, his touch steady, but she pulled away, too angry to feel it. "It's not a whim," she snapped. "I love him." "Then prove it," Margaret said, her voice rising. "If he can't give you the life you deserve, I won't be at that wedding. I mean it." Emily stood, her chair scraping the floor. She grabbed her coat and stormed out, the cool night air hitting her face like a slap. She didn't wait for Daniel. She needed space, needed to breathe. The streetlights blurred through her tears as she walked, her mother's words echoing in her head. Stability, deserve. Was loving Daniel a mistake? He found her an hour later, sitting on a bench in Fairmount Park, her arms wrapped around herself. The wind rustled the bare trees, carrying the faint hum of the city. He sat beside her, close but not touching, his breath visible in the chill. "You don't have to choose between me and them," he said, his voice low. "I'd never ask that." She looked at him, his face half lit by the street lamp, and felt her resolve crack. "They don't see you," she whispered. "They don't see how you make me feel. Like I'm enough, just as I am." He turned to her then, his eyes soft but fierce. "You are enough, Emily. More than enough. And I'm not going anywhere." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, his old jacket rough against her cheek. The warmth of him seeped into her, chasing away the cold. "I don't care what they think," she said, though part of her still did. "I just want us." He kissed the top of her head, his lips lingering. "Then we'll make it work, I promise." But as they sat there, the doubt lingered too. Margaret's threat hung over her like a shadow. Would her mother really miss her wedding? Could Emily build a life with Daniel if her family turned their backs? She clung to him tighter, trying to drown out the questions. But they buzzed in her mind like static. And then there was that dinner, the one where she'd said yes. It was a quiet night at her place, just the two of them, and a takeout pizza. He'd pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple silver band, no diamond, just the way she liked it, and asked her to marry him. She'd laughed through her tears, nodding before he'd even finished. It was perfect. It was them. Now, after Sophia's toast and Ruth's cryptic words at the wedding, Emily wondered if she'd been wrong to think it could be that simple. As the reception wound down and the guests drifted away, she lay awake beside Daniel in their hotel room, his steady breathing a contrast to her racing thoughts. What truth was Ruth talking about? And why did it feel like everything she'd built with him was about to shift? The wedding day dawned bright and brittle, the December sun glinting off the snow-dusted streets of Philadelphia. Emily woke with a flutter in her chest, a mix of nerves and joy that carried her through the morning, curling her dark hair, slipping into her gown, watching the winter light catch the lace. She'd dreamed of this day since Daniel slipped that silver ring onto her finger, and now it was here. But as she stood at the altar, his hand warm in hers, she couldn't shake the weight of her family's disapproval pressing against her ribs. Margaret had come, though her presence felt more like a concession than a blessing. She sat in the front row of the church, her lips a thin line, her navy dress stiff with formality. George fidgeted beside her, tugging at his tie, while Sophia whispered to James, her diamond earrings flashing with every turn of her head. Emily tried to focus on Daniel, on his quiet strength, the way he'd whispered, "You look beautiful," when she reached him. But the tension hung heavy, a storm waiting to break. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and applause, and soon they were in the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, surrounded by clinking glasses and the hum of celebration. Emily leaned into Daniel as they took their first dance, the band playing a slow, sweet melody. His arm steadied her, his breath warm against her temple. "We made it," he murmured, and she smiled, letting herself believe it. But then Sophia stood. The music faded as she tapped her glass, drawing every eye in the room. Emily's stomach tightened. She knew that look on her sister's face, the one that promised trouble. "I'd like to make a toast," Sophia said, her voice ringing out, bright and sharp, "to my sister Emily, who's always had a unique taste. I mean, it takes a special kind of vision to see a future with a truck driver when you could have had so much more. James and I, well, we're just glad to be here witnessing this charming choice." Laughter rippled through the crowd, some polite, some cruel. Emily's hands clenched in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. She felt Daniel stiffen beside her, but he didn't flinch, didn't look away. She wanted to stand, to shout that Sophia didn't know him, didn't know the man who'd sat up with her all night when she was sick, who'd driven hours to bring her a book she'd mentioned wanting. But her throat closed, her courage faltering under the weight of those stares. Then Ruth moved. Daniel's mother rose from her seat, a small woman with a presence that filled the room. The laughter died as she stepped forward, her emerald dress shimmering under the chandeliers. Every head turned, every whisper hushed. Emily watched, her breath caught, as Ruth stopped at the center of the floor, her silver hair gleaming like a crown. "I think," Ruth said, her voice soft but cutting through the silence like a blade, "it's time everyone here knew the truth about my son." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, past Margaret's frown, George's confusion, Sophia's sudden stillness. "He's not just what you see, not by a long shot." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through the crowd. Margaret leaned forward, her voice sharp. "What's that supposed to mean? We know what he does. He drives trucks. That's all there is to it, isn't it?" Ruth's lips curved, a smile that held secrets Emily couldn't guess. "Oh, you'll see," she said, her tone almost playful. "Just wait." Then she turned, her dress rustling as she returned to her seat, leaving the room buzzing with questions. Emily's pulse raced. She looked at Daniel, searching his face for answers. His jaw was set, but his eyes softened when they met hers. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's she talking about?" He leaned close, his lips brushing her ear, his voice so low it was almost lost in the rising chatter. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll show you. I promise." The rest of the night blurred past, cake cutting, toasts, the clatter of plates, but Emily barely noticed. Her mind spun, replaying Ruth's words, the way her family had gone quiet after that moment. Margaret stared at her plate, her fork untouched. George muttered something to himself, shaking his head. Sophia clutched James's arm, her earlier smugness replaced by unease. Even the guests seemed to sense it. Something big was coming, something they couldn't predict. When the last song ended and the lights dimmed, Emily stood with Daniel on the balcony outside the ballroom, the city skyline stretching out below them. Snowflakes drifted down, catching in her hair, and she shivered despite his jacket draped over her shoulders. "I don't understand," she said, her voice small against the wind. "What's happening, Daniel? What don't I know?" He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her like a shield. "You know me," he said, his voice steady. "The real me. That's what matters. Tomorrow, you'll see the rest." She wanted to push, to demand answers right then, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Earnest, unguarded, the same look he'd given her that rainy day by her car. She nodded, resting her forehead against his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her hands. Whatever Ruth meant, whatever Daniel was hiding, it couldn't change this quiet, solid thing between them, could it? As they stood there, the snow falling thicker now, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would rewrite everything. The truth, Ruth had called it. But whose truth? And why did it feel like a shadow creeping closer, ready to swallow the life she'd thought was hers? The morning after the wedding broke cold and gray, the sky over Philadelphia heavy with clouds that promised more snow. Emily barely slept, her mind tangled in Ruth's words and Daniel's quiet promise. She stood by the hotel window, still in her robe, watching the city wake up below. Daniel moved behind her, his footsteps soft on the carpet. "Ready?" he asked, his voice gentle but edged with something she couldn't place. Nerves, maybe? Or resolve? She turned, meeting his eyes. "For what?" He held out his hand. "To see what I couldn't tell you before." They drove in silence, Emily's fingers twisting in her lap, Daniel's hands steady on the wheel of his old pickup. Margaret, George, and Sophia followed in their sleek SUV, summoned by a call from Daniel that morning. Emily had overheard him on the phone, his tone firm. "You need to be there, all of you." She hadn't asked why. Part of her didn't want to know, not yet. The city gave way to an industrial sprawl on the outskirts, all steel and concrete, the air sharp with the scent of diesel. Daniel pulled up outside a massive building, its glass facade towering over the lot. A sign stretched across the top in bold letters, Carter Logistics. He cut the engine and stepped out, motioning for her to follow. The Harpers parked behind them, their faces a mix of confusion and suspicion as they climbed out into the cold. "What is this?" Margaret demanded, pulling her coat tighter. "Some kind of warehouse?" Daniel didn't answer her. He looked at Emily, his expression soft but unyielding, and opened the glass doors. Inside, the lobby gleamed, marble floors, a receptionist who nodded at Daniel like she knew him, a wall of framed awards glinting under recessed lights. He led them to an elevator, then up to the top floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a sprawling view of trucks and shipping yards stretching into the distance. He stopped in the middle of the room, turning to face them. "This," he said, his voice steady, "is Carter Logistics. one of the biggest transportation companies in the country, and I'm its heir." Emily's breath caught. She stared at him, then at the room. The leather chairs, the polished desk, the map on the wall dotted with routes crisscrossing North America. Margaret gasped, a sharp intake of air. George's mouth fell open, his tie askew. Sophia stumbled back a step, clutching James's arm even though he wasn't there to steady her. "But you're a truck driver," Margaret stammered, her voice cracking. "You said—" "I am," Daniel cut in, nodding. "I've driven rigs for years. Before I take over from my dad, I wanted to know the job from the ground up. Every mile, every breakdown, every late-night run. It's how we do things in this family. You don't lead people you don't understand." Emily's legs felt weak. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. 2 years. 2 years of dates and diners, of him showing up at her door with grease on his knuckles, of her falling for the man she thought he was. And all this time he'd been hiding this? A company worth billions, a legacy she'd never even guessed at? "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "All this time, Daniel. Why?" He knelt in front of her, his hands reaching for hers, but she pulled back, her eyes stinging. "Because I needed to know you loved me for me," he said, his voice raw. "Not for this. Not for money or a name. You saw me, Emily. The guy who fixes cars in the rain, who listens to you talk about history like it's the most important thing in the world. That's who I wanted to be for you." She shook her head, tears spilling over. "But you lied. You let me think—" I didn't lie," he said, urgent now. "I just didn't tell you everything. I was going to after the wedding, I swear. But then Sophia started in, and Mom couldn't stand it anymore." Ruth stepped forward, her small frame casting a long shadow. "He's telling the truth," she said. "I raised him to earn what he has, not just take it. And I saw how you looked at him, Emily, like he was enough. That's why I spoke up." Emily stood, brushing past them both, and walked to the window. The trucks below moved like ants, orderly and relentless. A world she'd never known was his. She thought of their first meeting, his easy grin, the way he'd made her feel safe. Had that been real, or just a story he'd let her believe? Margaret's voice cut through the silence. "Well," she said, smoothing her hair, "this changes things, doesn't it?" Her tone was lighter now, almost approving. Sophia crossed her arms, her lips pursed, envy flickering in her eyes. George just stared at Daniel, then at the awards on the wall, like he was seeing him for the first time. But Emily didn't care about their reactions. Not yet. She turned back to Daniel, her chest tight. "You should have trusted me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I loved you when I thought you had nothing. Why didn't you believe that was enough?" He stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "I did believe it. That's why I married you. But I was scared, Emily. Scared you'd see me differently if you knew." She looked away, out at the gray sky, the weight of his words sinking in. She wanted to forgive him, to fall back into his arms and pretend this didn't hurt, but it did. The man she'd married was more than she'd known, and she couldn't unsee it now. Margaret approached her, hesitant. I misjudged him," she said, her voice softer than Emily had ever heard it. "Maybe I misjudged you too." Emily didn't respond. She needed air, needed time. She walked to the elevator, the doors sliding shut behind her, leaving Daniel and her family staring after her. As it descended, she pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. He'd shown her the truth, just like he'd promised. But what did it mean for them now? The elevator hummed as it carried Emily down, the sound a dull roar in her ears. She stepped out into the lobby of Carter Logistics, the marble cool under her boots, and pushed through the glass doors into the biting December air. Snowflakes swirled around her, catching in her hair, her breath clouding in front of her face. She walked to the edge of the lot, staring at the rows of trucks lined up like soldiers, their engines silent now. Her mind churned. Daniel's words, Ruth's quiet certainty, the look on her family's faces when the truth spilled out. It was too much, all at once. She didn't hear him approach until his shadow fell beside hers. "Emily," Daniel said, his voice low, rough with worry. She didn't turn, but she felt him there, close enough to touch if she wanted to. "I'm sorry," he went on. "I should have told you sooner. I didn't know how." She hugged her arms around herself, the wind tugging at her coat. "You thought I'd care about this?" she asked, nodding toward the building. "The money? The company? You thought that's what mattered to me?" "No," he said quickly, stepping in front of her now, his green eyes searching hers. "I knew it didn't. That's why I fell for you, because you saw me when I was just a guy with a truck and a toolbox. But I was scared, Em. Scared that knowing this would change us, even if you didn't want it to." She looked up at him, tears prickling her eyes again. "It doesn't change how I feel," she said, her voice trembling. "I loved you when I thought you had nothing. I loved you when you showed up at my door with pizza and a smile, when you listened to me ramble about old letters like they were treasures. That's who I married, Daniel, not this." He reached for her hands, and this time she let him take them, his fingers warm against her cold skin. "Then forgive me," he said, his voice breaking. "I messed up keeping it from you. But I swear, from now on, no secrets, just us." She studied his face, the lines around his eyes from long nights on the road, the earnestness she'd fallen for that first rainy day. The hurt still ached, a bruise under her ribs, but beneath it was something stronger. She'd chosen him, not a title or a fortune, and he'd chosen her, too, in his own messy, imperfect way. "Okay," she whispered, squeezing his hands. "No secrets." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against the wind, and she buried her face in his chest, breathing him in, motor oil and pine, the scent of the man she knew. They stood there, snow dusting their shoulders, until footsteps crunched behind them. Margaret's voice came first, tentative. "Emily." She turned, still in Daniel's embrace, to see her family approaching. Margaret, George, and Sophia, their faces softened by the cold or maybe something else. Margaret stopped a few feet away, her hands clasped in front of her. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice quieter than Emily had ever heard it. "Both of you. I judged him, judged this. Before I understood, I was wrong." Emily blinked, surprised. "Mom, you—" "No, let me finish," Margaret said, holding up a hand. "When I married your father, my family didn't approve. They thought he was beneath me, a dreamer with no money. I fought them, but I guess I forgot what that felt like. Wanting someone despite what everyone else says. I put that pressure on you, and—" George stepped forward, his usual gruffness gone. "She's right," he said, glancing at Daniel. "You're a good man. I see that now. Took me a minute, but I see it." He extended a hand, and Daniel shook it, a small smile breaking through. Sophia lingered behind, her arms crossed, her eyes on the ground. Then she sighed, stepping closer. "I was awful," she said, her voice small. "At the wedding before, I was jealous, Em. You've always been the one who didn't need to prove anything, and I hated that he made you happy when I couldn't stand it. I'm sorry." Emily stared at her sister, the years of rivalry flashing between them. Childhood fights, teenage jabs, the constant measuring up. But here, in the snow, Sophia looked different, stripped bare. Emily reached out, pulling her into a quick, fierce hug. "It's okay," she said. "We're okay." Ruth joined them then, her small figure cutting through the wind. She stopped beside Daniel and Emily, her silver hair glowing against the gray sky. "I told you last night," she said, her voice warm, "that real love doesn't need a name or a dollar sign to prove it. You too, you've got that." and I'm proud of you both." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She looked at Ruth, then at her family, and finally at Daniel, his arm still around her. The pieces settled, the hurt fading into something softer. Understanding, maybe, or hope. They weren't perfect, any of them. Margaret would still fuss, Sophia would still compete, and Daniel would still carry his quiet fears. But they were here, together, and that was enough. They walked back to the building as a group, the snow crunching under their feet. Inside, the warmth hit them like a wave, and Emily paused in the lobby, looking up at the Carter Logistics sign. Daniel followed her gaze, then leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "This is ours now," he said. "Not just mine, ours." She smiled, the first real one since the wedding, and laced her fingers through his. "Ours," she echoed. Outside, the snow fell thicker, blanketing the trucks, the city, the past. They stood there, hand in hand, facing the future. Not as a truck driver and a museum worker, not as an heir and his bride, but as Emily and Daniel, two people who'd found each other on a rainy day and held on through the storm. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was theirs to take. And as Ruth's words echoed in her mind, real love doesn't need proving. Emily knew they'd make it, 1 mile at a time.